Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Hello, my friends. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to put a trigger warning out here at the beginning. We're going to be talking some today about physicians losing their jobs or bad outcomes or parts of physician health, including poor mental health, including suicide. My hope of this conversation is to be able to allow us to see how the default ways of thinking that we have can lead to these difficult situations. But I just want to acknowledge that this might not be the conversation for you today. So if you feel like you are not in a place where you can listen to that, I totally understand. And this is just not an episode for today. Next week, I am going to be talking about how can we move out of default assumptions, and it's going to have a different tone, but I just want to acknowledge that this episode might feel too heavy. So if you feel like, you know what, mentally, emotionally, I can't handle that today, this is an episode to skip. And until next time, take care. Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's episode. It's not uncommon that I find myself in conversations with other physicians when something has gone wrong in their lives. It could be someone is terminated. It could be that someone has been disciplined. It could be that there is a bad outcome. There's a variety of instances where this turns up, but the conversations tend to start off in the same way each time. And that is with the person trying to figure out, what have they done wrong? This makes a lot of sense because we are trained and socialized before our training to be highly responsible human beings. As physicians, we are trained to be responsible for the care that we provide. And I would say that that dips into the emotional responsibility for it, but also the medical legal responsibility for it. And it is so institutionalized, right? We think about morbidity and mortality rounds. We think about the ways that medical errors are handled, right? We are trained to be very responsible in that realm. And most likely, if you are a person who has gotten into medical school, gotten into training, and you're sitting here listening to me, most likely you were a highly responsible human before you started your medical training. You were someone who was reliable. You were someone who turned things in. You were probably good with people. All of these parts together have created this internal identity or narrative that you are responsible. And that can be very helpful, right? You're a highly responsible person that people trust, right? That's a good thing. But it can also be harmful and damaging because sometimes we will assume that we are responsible for everything. We are responsible for other people's emotions, for their experiences, for their outcomes, for their health, for their satisfaction. Just think for just a brief moment and give yourself all the deep breaths that you need of all of the realms in your life where you feel highly responsible. We're going to come into this conversation from this framework because I want you to see, how does it make sense that I am this highly responsible person, that is a part of my identity, and that this takes me into this place where I start making all these assumptions when something has gone wrong. Because again, it's such a common pattern that I see. It's certainly something I've experienced on my own. And it really creates a lot of self judgment, self blame, chaos, and distress. And obviously, if we, really look at the big picture of what happens in medicine, I am 100% certain that a lot of this feeds into the poor mental health that so many physicians struggle with. We can look at burnout on one end, we can look at certainly depression and substance abuse, and we can look at suicide. We could look at all of those places as sort of an end result of this highly internalized sense of responsibility so that we can see that although there is a good side to being highly responsible, there is also a very potentially damaging side to feeling so responsible all of the time. So, if we come into this conversation with that framework, I want to walk through some very common assumptions that people coming to talk to me share with me, because it's where we have to start to undo some of this. So, someone comes to me, they want to, they're starting coaching, or they want to talk about what coaching can do for them, or just kind of vent and unload. Something has gone wrong. Again, it could be something big, like what I mentioned, like someone's been fired, someone's been disciplined in some way, but it could be something smaller. It could be that they got a patient complaint that they had a really bad press ganey, or some other thing that happened to them. These are the things that people will start off the conversation. These are assumptions that they believe to be true. And I want you to listen and sort of think, oh, God, yeah, that's me too. I also make those assumptions all the time, so that we can see, how is this affecting me? So, assumption number one, logic applies, right? We assume that if this happens, then that happens. And that is true of, everything that we experience, including bad things. We assume that if we are terminated, that there is a reason, there is a clear reason, and it was this, and then that happened. It is so sad to say this out loud, right? But it is unfortunately so real that most physician contracts right now seem to be written with that allow no cause terminations, meaning they don't have to have a reason. They don't have to tell you a reason if there is one. They don't have to justify it by saying, oh, well, you did this and then this happened. They can just say, you're no longer working here. And that is legal. And it's terrifying. And it seems like so many of the conversations that I have had with physicians, or have seen online in physician groups or coaching groups, are people who have been terminated, physicians who have been terminated, not given any information about why they're being let go, not being told anything that they could learn or grow from, just that they are let go, right? And we assume that there's something really wrong with us. There's something wrong that we've done, and that there's a clear reason. There may be nothing. So the assumption that there's a logical explanation for something that's happened, we need to let go of that. There might be, but we shouldn't just assume that that's the case. The next assumption, that everything is preventable. Again, within medicine, we are socialized to believe that if something bad happened as an outcome, that there was something we could have done to prevent it. Again, there is a good side to this, that when we are cautious, when we are thoughtful, when we are prepared, when we are knowledgeable, that we can prevent a lot of harm, right? If we wash our hands and use sterile technique, we can prevent a lot of surgical infections. That's true, right? But it can become more, again, sinister than that because we can't prevent everything. We just can't. We don't always know how a body is going to react to something. We don't always know what the natural disease progression is going to be. We don't always know because bodies didn't read the textbook, right? That's true in life, it's true in medicine, but we need to let go of this idea that everything is preventable, including whatever the bad thing was that happened. Perhaps someone is being let go or someone has been disciplined, and we think, oh, there should have been, a clear thing that we could have done beforehand that would have stopped this from happening. It may not be true. It may be true, it may not be true, but we shouldn't just default assume that it's true that we could have prevented everything from happening, right? Can we prevent every cold from happening that we develop? No. We might be really good about masking up when we're around sick people. We might be really good about washing our hands. We can be really good about whatever precaution, taking, getting enough sleep and taking good care of our immune systems. We will still not prevent every cold, right? We can do everything right and still not prevent it. That just happens. We cannot prevent death. Death will happen. Now, there are lots of things that we can do to delay and avoid, but we cannot keep it from happening. Okay. Taking these examples a little bit far, but you can see we have some very entrenched assumptions, and that keeps us quite stuck when we encounter something bad or difficult. The next assumption becomes much more personal. We will feel that we are a hot mess. Maybe we're a hot mess emotionally. Maybe we think of ourselves as lazy or like we just don't know how to adult or any number of things, right? Any number of negative sort of self-blame things. And we assume that every other adult has got it together, right? We assume that they aren't caught up in their own emotions. We assume that their thought process is 100% logical and not affected by their emotions. We assume that other adults have got their stuff together, right? And that is not always true. And it is including people who are in charge of things. Now, am I saying that every person who is a leader or a boss or, managing something, is a chaotic mess? No, but I am saying they are human, that you don't know what is going on inside their brains. You do not know, how rational or not rational their behavior is. All you know is what it sounds like inside your head. And again, you probably have internalized, a lot of self blame and self judgment because we are socialized for that. And we assume that everybody else is just this perfect, flawless human being who is not swayed by their emotions. My friends, it is not true. It is not true. So let's let that one go. Next is, and this is a big one, we assume that we are responsible for bad outcomes. We also tend to assume that we are not responsible for positive outcomes. Now, is this true of all physicians? No, of course not. Is it true of all professionals? No, of course not. But if you are here, there is a good chance that when something goes wrong, again, at work or at home, that you have internalized that you are responsible. Now, it could be that you think that you have caused the bad outcome to occur. That's one level of responsibility. You just assume that if someone is displeased or something has gone wrong, that you are responsible for it. That is your fault. You blame yourself. But sometimes, too, we will assume that we are responsible for fixing the bad outcome. That, again, as highly responsible people, it is our job to make it better. And we might have both of these things going on, right? Where there's a bad outcome, we feel like we have caused the bad outcome and we are responsible for fixing it. This default thinking is very heavy, and I would argue probably really contributes to a lot of the poor mental health outcomes that physicians experience, because we we are highly responsible. We do carry a lot of responsibility in the work that we do because sometimes we are literally operating inside someone else's body. Um, and, our actions are important. Our thought process, our preparedness are important. I'm not gonna say that that's not true, of course. And we are also human. We also are working in a broken healthcare system that emphasizes speed and profit and minimizing costs and therefore minimizing support. And so the pressure to perform is higher and higher. The resources and support to perform may be lower and lower. And something's got to give in that process. But because we have internalized that it is our fault that we can't go faster, that we can't do it all by ourselves, and I mean all of it by ourselves, we carry this high degree of responsibility. And so when something has gone wrong, even if it wasn't something that, we had any awareness of, we will often carry this responsibility through and assume, right, that there is automatically something that we did. This, I think, really comes up when people have been um, disciplined or terminated or something, that we feel that there must be something horribly egregious that we've done. Sometimes there might be. I would argue it's probably so rarely an intentional misstep, right? But there may be, yes, there was a bad outcome. And yes, we were taking care of that patient. And yes, perhaps if we knew something different, if we weren't, so overly, yes, let's just say, right, there are things that happen that could have been differently, but sometimes too, there was not something that we could have done differently, or there is not something that, if we're terminated without cause, there is not something that we could have done or known about because we received no information about what was going on. How can we be expected to, magic wand the situation when we have no idea that there's a problem? This, unfortunately, again, comes up, I think, a lot in the termination without cause. Is there's no lead up, there's no discussion, there's no, I don't know, um, probation or disciplinary action, when we have done something wrong. Um, but regardless of whether we did or didn't do something wrong, again, we carry this heaviness of responsibility when it may not be appropriate. If somebody doesn't like us, somebody has just a personality conflict with us, and let's say that we haven't been rude, we haven't been dismissive, we haven't acted in a way that we don't feel is appropriate or that other people would say is appropriate. But let's just say there's a personality clash. Um, are we responsible for being wrong, for being who we are, and not having a personality that fits whatever this person or this culture dictates? That gets into a very deep place. But because, again, we are so socialized to believe that we must be in the wrong if something has not gone well, we will often carry that. And again, what a devastating thought to have, to assume that you must be wrong. And especially in the circumstance where you haven't had any bad outcomes, you've not gotten any feedback, you've not been told anything other than, sat down and say, we're letting you go. if you carry this idea that I'm always responsible, and you then, after trying to figure out and not being able to determine a thing that happened, you make yourself wrong because, again, your default thought pattern is that I must have done something wrong or I must be wrong. That is what leads to very real harm to us as physicians, right? Believing that you yourself are wrong, that you are just wrong in some ways, that it's so bad that you would just be let go. Just I feel the heaviness of that, and yet it's something that's come up over and over and over again in conversations with physicians. So we need to be very aware of this assumption of responsibility. It makes sense that we feel so highly responsible for things, but we need to be able to step back from that assumption and say, it's possible here that I didn't do anything wrong. It's possible here that yes, I and this place, this group, this person do not get along, and that's the reason why maybe, this thing happened. That doesn't mean that I as a human am wrong. That doesn't mean that I as a person am bad, right? It just means that me plus this just isn't working. But that's not the default mode for most of us, again, because of the socialization. So it's really important that we're aware of that. Um, Another assumption that we frequently make is that other people's decisions, judgments, evaluations are correct, that they can be correct even. And again, it becomes this internal narrative that we have been socialized into, that if something has gone wrong, then I must have done something, or something about me is wrong. And it must be true that they are correct. This often really comes from hierarchy. And it comes from, again, these sort of institutionalized systems in medicine where we assume that whoever is the most senior, whoever is the most published, whoever is the boss, whoever is the leader, that whatever they are saying is correct, whatever they are deciding is correct, that there is a correct answer. And unfortunately, so much of what's going on in medicine is not in this realm. It's really more sort of business decisions. It's more profit margins. It's how do we control the optics of what's happened? There's so much of that right now. And it really juts up against this idea that we have that someone saying something, again, especially somebody in authority, that what they say must be correct because we are so believing in the hierarchy. So again, let's think about how this comes up for people of if someone tells you that you've done something wrong, yes, sometimes that might be correct. Sometimes perhaps your information is not up to date. Perhaps there was some piece of the clinical puzzle that you didn't have access to. And, sometimes that's going to be we didn't ask the right question, or maybe we couldn't ask the right question. Perhaps we were doing the best we could with what we knew. Perhaps we were in an emergency situation, right? There's lots of different ways that might look. But this is kind of a Monday morning quarterback situation, right? Where we assume that whatever somebody else says was the correct way is correct, is right, that there is a right way. And that thinking is really rampant in medicine. Takes me back to a lot of the primary care family medicine board questions where they, will have a question stem and they'll say, which is the next appropriate step, right? assuming that there is a 100% clear standard of care in all situations that we should all operate on 100% of the time. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't reasons why, and there might be algorithms why, and unfortunately, all the algorithms don't always match each other. I'm not suggesting that medical evidence is not important, but I am suggesting that in the real world, when you are in the room with patients, there may be reasons why you're not grabbing the first line choice. Now, probably if there's a huge difference between the first line choice and the second and the third line choice, hopefully there is some reason why you are making that choice. But again, we so often assume that there is only one correct choice because there is a textbook and patients should present like a textbook and we should have that textbook memorized, right? So it can always be this perfect melding. And of course, that is just not the case. But if we are socialized into this system that constantly assumes that there is one correct course of action, decision, way to take care of somebody, way to respond, that gets us into trouble. We have emergency algorithms like ACLS to be able to be very clear on this is the current best evidence-based strategy to address this situation where this is going on so that we can very quickly click through and respond because time is of the essence in those circumstances. The same does not apply in most clinical situations where we are not in an emergency and we are not trying to make a snap decision. This, again, is true in the context of the exam room. It is true in the context of the administrative side, where decisions are made about hiring, firing, promotions, tenure, all of those circumstances, right, where there is no one right thing. So when we get stuck believing that someone else's decision, judgment, evaluation is the correct, we are often making ourselves wrong. We need to be aware of these assumptions and these patterns of thinking if we are going to navigate the challenges of practicing medicine. There's a lot that's here. There's a lot to consider when you're up against difficult circumstances. My hope is that if we can tease apart some of these elements, if we can really look and see what am I assuming in this situation? And is it helpful for me to keep these assumptions? Then we have an opportunity to really learn and grow through, unfortunately, the many traumatic things that happen to us. Practicing medicine is hard. We are up with people's emotions, and depending on what you do, their physical health or lack of health all day, all the time. If you take care of patients, more likely than not, you are in and out and in and out and in and out of, exam rooms, operating rooms, hospital rooms. You are in and out of people's lives all day long, possibly all night long, trying to do the best you can to synthesize your knowledge, your expertise, what's available to you in the setting that you are, and what this human body needs. You are constantly making decisions over and over and over again. And yes, we have a high degree of responsibility. We want to make good decisions. We want to include patients in the decisions. We want to be able to be clear about what our options are and what options are available here and now, so that we can provide the best care that we're able to do. We're not challenging that here. But in recognizing that, we need to also have some humility that not only are we human beings, but also the people who are involved in all the situations that we struggle with on an emotional level Again, whether that's patients or whether that's leadership, hospital systems, the medical system, the insurance systems, that we are all humans and systems are flawed. Things are flawed. And if we constantly assume that something bad is our fault, that it is correct and we are wrong, that logic applies to all the decisions, that everything is preventable, that everybody else has things figured out and it's me that's the problem, that I'm responsible for everything, we are doing ourselves harm. We are going to stay in, an emotionally very heavy and constricted place. We are going to struggle. We are probably going to, find ourselves doing less and less and less and feeling constantly judged, belittled, demoralized. We have to be aware of what these assumptions are if we are going to take care of ourselves, because bad things do happen. Again, bad things happen to bodies. Stressors happen, anxieties happen. They happen to us, they happen to our patients, they happen to the people that we work alongside. Bad things will happen. Decisions are made that are harmful. Again, that's in the context of patient care and in the context of working with other humans. Sometimes you have done something wrong, because we all will make mistakes. Sometimes bad things will happen, even if you have not done anything wrong, even if the person making the decision has not done something wrong. Bad things will still happen. Cancers will advance. Infections will advance. Bodies behave in ways that don't make themselves like the textbook. Things will happen. All bodies will die. We know these things, and yet it's very easy to forget them because of the way that we're socialized. My friends, this is a big piece of sort of the emotional parts of coaching work, and it is really important that we understand these patterns that we have so that we can get ourselves unstuck. You can imagine a scenario where somebody is experiencing something stressful. Again, let's just use the example of being terminated and not knowing why, not having known there was a bad patient outcome, not knowing that other people are being laid off, not knowing that I don't know, let's say you threw things in the OR or you were yelling at people in the hallway. There was not some event. There is not something. You've not been talked to. You've just been let go. If you carry these default assumptions with you, you assume that you've done something wrong, that you should have been able to prevent it, that there's a logical explanation for what happened, that everybody else has things figured out and it's just you that's a mess, and that their decision is correct. What a heavy, heavy burden to carry. You can imagine how that weighs on a person, how that blocks them from so much of living their life at that point. And again, even to the level of harming themselves. It's really important that we understand that, because if you think about what we hear when physicians have taken their own lives or something bad has happened to physicians in their mental health, we are so good at hiding, but there could be a circumstance, right, where someone has this thing happen. They have these feelings. They are assuming that they were in the wrong and they can't think of any way out of it other than taking their own life, harming themselves in some way, whether that be substance abuse or, relationship challenges. There are so many ways that this turns up. I didn't intend this to be a warning sign about physician suicide, but unfortunately, right, you can see how it happens. And so it is really important that we talk about it. It is really important that we understand how people get to this place. It is really important that we understand what these assumptions are. My friends, I'm going to leave it here for today, but I'm going to help us in next week's episode by sharing what can we do when something bad has happened. Here we've really focused on what comes up when a bad thing happens and where do we get stuck. And next week we're going to talk through what can we do differently? How can we start to work through the process when something difficult has happened? Because it just will. It just will. Life is life. Medicine is hard. We're human beings and things happen to us. We don't need to be stopped by that, but we do need a different approach than what we are doing here. All right. Again, my friends, I'm sorry that was heavy and maybe what you were looking for this week or maybe not. But again, I think it's so important that we have an opportunity to talk about it. Until next week, I hope that this helps. I hope that it, just resonates with, you're right, I do carry these things. And if we talk about the more extreme examples, we can see how this shows up in other places in our lives that are not quite as heavy, that are not quite as severe. And that gives us all an opportunity to grow. My friends, until next week, take care.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.